All right, let's get right into it. Today we're digging into a pretty startling theory about the U.S. national debt. The source material we're looking at suggests there's a plan, but get this, it's not a plan to pay the debt back, it's a plan to make it, well, just disappear.
And it all starts with this number, an absolutely mind-boggling number. According to our source, in late 2025, the U.S. national debt blew past $38 trillion for the first time ever. It's a figure that's almost impossible to wrap your head around. By any normal standard, that's a crushing weight. But what if the people in charge are playing a completely different game?
And this quote right here, this is the core of the entire theory. The argument is that there's a very sophisticated plan in motion, not to tackle this mountain of debt, but to make it vanish. If it's true, it would be one of the biggest transfers of wealth in all of modern history.
Okay, so to really get this theory, we first have to understand the why. Why would anyone even think about doing something this radical? Well, it all comes down to the sheer scale of the problem as our source sees it. Just look at the speed on this chart. It's not just big, it's getting faster. The source points out that in 2025, the debt shot up by $1 trillion in just 60 days. $1 trillion in 2 months. And the projection? It's on track to hit $40 trillion by 2027. We're talking about exponential growth here. And this is where the real pressure comes from. For fiscal year 2025, the source claims that the interest payments alone were over $1 trillion. That's more than the entire defense budget. Think about that. A huge slice of our tax dollars is literally buying nothing. No roads, no schools, no defense, it's just paying the interest on old debt. So this all leads to what's called a debt spiral. It's basically a mathematical trap. It's like financial quicksand. The government has to borrow new money just to pay the interest on the old money it borrowed. But that new borrowing makes the total debt bigger, which means the next interest payment is even bigger, so you have to borrow even more. You see the problem? It's a vicious cycle that, according to our source, the U.S. is now caught in.
Which brings us to the big question, right? If you can't tax your way out of it, and you can't cut spending enough to fix it, what's left? What's plan B? Well, this is where the theory takes a really wild turn.
All right, part 2, the solution. The source we're looking at alleges that the primary tool for making this debt go poof is something called debt monetization. It's a fancy term for a process that happens quietly at the central bank. So, what on earth is debt monetization? Let's cut through the jargon. It's the modern version of firing up the printing presses. I mean, it's all digital now, but the idea is the same. The central bank, the Fed, literally creates new dollars out of thin air. Here's how our source says it works, in 3 simple steps. First, the Treasury says, hey, we need to borrow money, so it issues bonds. Second, the Federal Reserve creates new digital dollars from scratch. And third, the Fed uses that brand new money to buy the bonds from the Treasury. Just like that, the government has fresh cash. And if you're thinking, this sounds nuts, they'd never do that, well, the source argues they already have. Remember all the talk about quantitative easing, or QE, after the 2008 crisis, and again during COVID? That was the dress rehearsal. The Fed bought trillions in government debt, all under the name of emergency measures. And this whole idea is powered by a new way of thinking, called modern monetary theory, or MMT. You know, the old school view was simple. You take on debt, you have to pay it back with real value. But MMT says, not so fast. If you're a country that can print its own money, you can never truly go broke. You can always just create more to pay your bills. The only real speed limit, they say, is inflation. But, and this is a huge but, there's no free lunch here. Our source is very clear on this point. The debt doesn't really vanish. The cost just gets transferred to you, to me, to anybody who saves in dollars. By creating more money, you make every dollar that already exists worth a little bit less. It's a hidden tax on your savings.
So you can't just come out and tell everyone you're printing trillions of dollars, right? It would cause a panic. You need some kind of cover story. And that brings us to the next piece of the puzzle, a kind of financial sleight of hand.
And believe it or not, this has happened before. Way back in 1934, in the middle of the Great Depression, President Roosevelt basically just signed a piece of paper and changed the official price of gold from about $20 an ounce to $35. And poof, overnight, the government's balance sheet looked almost 70% better. So, the source suggests a modern version of that same play. Right now, the U.S. government officially values its massive gold reserves at a bizarrely low price of $42 an ounce. But what if they just decided to revalue it to something closer to the real market price? Say, a hypothetical $10,000 an ounce. all of a sudden that 11 billion on the books becomes more than 2.6 trillion? It doesn't actually fix the debt, but it creates the appearance of a stronger balance sheet, providing the political cover they need.
Now, of course, a move this big doesn't happen in a vacuum. The rest of the world is watching. And according to the theory we're examining, they aren't just watching anymore. They're starting to react.
And the source points to signs that are pretty hard to ignore. China has been steadily selling off its U.S. debt. Russia has almost completely dumped its dollar reserves. Saudi Arabia is now open to selling oil and other currencies. And a group of countries known as the BRICS are building their own parallel financial systems. These aren't just random headlines. They're dots connecting to form a bigger picture.
So, if they're moving away from the dollar, where are they going? Well, take a look. They're buying gold, and lots of it. Central banks around the globe are stacking gold at the fastest pace in decades. It's almost as if they're getting ready for a world where the dollar isn't the only game in town.
And there's another major pressure point: oil. For the last half-century, the whole world has needed to buy U.S. dollars to buy oil. This petrodollar system created a massive artificial demand for the currency. But what happens as the world shifts to electric vehicles? Less demand for oil means less demand for dollars. It's like kicking a critical support beam out from under the whole system.
Okay, so let's tie all these threads together. The debt spiral, the money printing, the revaluation, the world moving away from the dollar. What's the endgame here according to our source?
The source gives this whole process a name, the Great Repricing. And it's not a default in the way we usually think about it, where a government just says, sorry, can't pay. No, it's something much quieter, much more subtle. It's a deliberate plan to devalue the currency itself, to shrink the real value of the debt by destroying the purchasing power of the dollar.
And get this, the source puts a timeline on it. A pretty fast one. It predicts the Fed ramps up its bond buying within the next 18 months. That leads to full-blown monetization by 2027, just to keep up with interest payments. And within 5 to 10 years, the global move away from the dollar hits a critical tipping point. That's not that far off.
And so we're left with this final, provocative question from our source. The theory frames this whole strategy not as a rescue plan, but as a silent transfer of wealth from people who save to people who owe, all hidden in plain sight. And the question it asks is simple. Will you see it for what it is while it's happening, or will you just wake up one day and realize the money you worked so hard for now buys half of what it used to? It's definitely something to think about.